Okay, for this month's experiment, let's see if a film writer can get through a voiceover about a nostalgic Christmas movie without having to pause and sob uncontrollably. The answer, in case you were wondering, turned out to be no. First things first, some of you are probably wondering why we're doing this movie instead of Christmas Vacation, since I kind of intimated that was on the schedule a few months ago. And while that was part of the vague plan at one point, it just didn't feel right to jump into another vacation movie with only one episode since the last one.
Hallelujah! Holy shit! Where's the Tylenol?
And, you know, it's not like there's a rule that says I can only talk about that movie or any Christmas movie in December. In any case, A Christmas Story is the sort of film this series was in some respects tailor-made for. Largely passed on by audiences when it was released to theaters in 1983, the film gradually but steadily became a perennial favorite thanks to home video and especially TV broadcasts, evolving from being a favorite among older audiences seeking a reprieve from more conventional saccharine holiday fare into a full-fledged, unironic family classic, which is doubly amusing when you consider that the film itself has one foot planted just one step over the line into cynicism on the subject of nostalgia, much like director Bob Clark's previous hit movie, Porky's. Today, A Christmas Story is so widely beloved that it received 2 sequels, neither of which you need to bother with, and for purposes of this particular project, might as well not exist, inspired the similarly beloved TV series The Wonder Years, and has at least 1, sometimes 2 cable networks who've made running it for 24 hours straight on Christmas Day into an annual tradition. On the other hand, bona fides like that make it the kind of nostalgic classic that you absolutely should question your appraisal of from time to time. When movies that are about evoking happy memories of a quote-unquote simpler time connect with audiences, they tend to do so in an intensely personal way, even if those simpler times aren't something you yourself have ever directly experienced. A Christmas Story is, after all, a film widely beloved by Generation Xers, recounting the childhood experiences of their grandparents. Such is the human condition, and those are the kind of connections that make one want to bend over backwards to excuse whatever doesn't work while inflating their opinion of what does.
There it is, my house. At good old Cleveland Street, how could I ever forget it? And there I am, with that dumb round face and that stupid stocking cap.
And A Christmas Story compounds that tendency thanks to its episodic vignette story structure and the fact that most of its fans first encountered it as a home viewing experience, where one can easily slip in and out of attentiveness or even the room. I bet hundreds of people who will hopefully watch this video can name all of the film's major sequences from memory, but can you remember what order they all happen in? I bet that number isn't quite as high. Few other films have proved as perfectly suited to becoming omnipresent, comfortably familiar background noise for the type of mulling about the house relaxation holiday that so defines the American middle-class ideal of Christmas. And while omnipresent, comfortably familiar things certainly have their place and even their merits,
Mom, this is just the same old dumb parade as last year.
Ralphie, will you please calm down?
they generally don't represent the top tiers of their field. So, which is it? Is the simple story of Ralphie and his Red Ryder Carbine-Action 200-shot range model air rifle BB gun with a compass in the stock and a thing which tells time the quietly great little movie that many remember? Or is it the Applebee's of Silent Generation nostalgia? Is A Christmas Story really that good? Hey, guess what? This is probably not going to be a super long installment. Some things take less time to properly cover than others. So if you were looking forward to spending another hour with me like the Spider-Man movies, sorry. The fact is, whatever merits you ascribe or don't ascribe to A Christmas Story, what I think can be agreed on is that it's a remarkably small, quiet, unassuming production. The stakes really are as small as whether or not the kid will get the present he wants for Christmas without even the narrative fig leaf of some larger concern. The toy in question isn't really symbolic of some other pressing need in Ralphie's life, he doesn't require it as part of solving a bigger problem, and while ultimately getting it does come with the same type of bittersweet curveball that seems to define his life to that point,
I shot my eye out!
it doesn't teach him a lesson about what's really important or how his desire for this specific thing was overblown or misplaced. Getting the Red Ryder Carbine-Action 200-shot range model air rifle BB gun with a compass in the stock and a thing which tells time is the most important thing in the world to Ralphie, and thus it's the most important thing in the world as far as the movie is concerned.
Ah, there it is. The holy grail of Christmas gifts.
Whether we like to admit it or not, on some level we are all fascinated by the common minutiae which we share with others. And while that doesn't mean that observed human domesticity is everyone's favorite genre at all times, well, the most popular genre of, say, television comedy since pretty much its inception has been, hey look, there's a TV camera in this family's living room. Let's watch. And if you want a quick, easy shortcut to why this movie connects with people, I'd say that's about as concise as you can get. A Christmas Story is all about the, to varying degrees, certainly relatable minutiae of its characters' lives. And it approaches all of them strictly on their own terms. It isn't trying to teach you a lesson from their example. The narrative doesn't bend so as to make them components of a morality play. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's not the only thing that the story of otherwise ordinary people needs to exist for. If the film did have a message or a point, by happenstance or otherwise, it could easily be that the story of a life, or maybe life period, doesn't actually need a meaning to be meaningful. It begins, tells its story, ends, and it doesn't ask us to consider anything about what we just saw other than that these were people. They lived lives and they were here. Is that not enough?
That Christmas would live in our memories as the Christmas when we were introduced to Chinese turkey. All was right with the world.
Most movies about nostalgia, that is to say, and this is an important distinction, their narrative is not just set in the past, but about the fact that they are set in the past, fall into two camps. Either positing that the past, usually childhood or our teenage years, really was a lost golden age to be fondly missed, or that the supposed good old days were actually not all that good at all, and we need to take off our rose-tinted glasses. What A Christmas Story does differently, and remember, in 1983, movies about nostalgia were not nearly as ubiquitous as they are today, is to largely call things down the middle. Yes, it's a movie that ultimately accepts without question that the image of a 9-year-old boy falling asleep at the conclusion of Christmas Day, cradling the one favorite gift he truly wanted, is a suitable emotional high note to end on, but it's also a movie that's willing to be honest about other American holiday staples like mall Santas and thoughtful gifts by clueless relatives being not all that pleasant of experiences in the moment.
Immediately, my feet began to sweat as those two fluffy little bunnies with the blue button eyes stared sappily up at me.
I posit that this, more than anything, is the secret to A Christmas Story's enduring legacy. As a 1980s family movie about middle-class white people goes, it's honest, allowing viewers both the comforting reassurance of wistful sentimentality with exactly enough darkness to make it a curative for the more saccharine Christmastime fare we're all used to.
Ho, ho, ho.
Let me show you what I mean. My favorite scene in this movie isn't really any of the iconic ones, or one that even focuses on Ralphie or Christmas. It's Mommy's Little Piggy. The setup is pretty basic. The littler kid won't eat for whatever reason, he doesn't respond to threats, so Mom tricks him into playing a game of pretending to be a pig, during which he eats his food.
Show me how the piggies eat. Be a good boy, show Mommy how the piggies eat.
It's funny physical comedy, sure, but pay attention to the great Melinda Dillon's performance throughout the whole first family dinner scene. It's a really remarkable turn, particularly her face, all building up to the way she finally delivers the big line.
Mommy's little piggy.
The middle American homemaker is among the most underserved of commonly seen characters in film. As it's such an all-consuming, time-dominating, long-term job by its very nature, we seldom end up with the opportunity to see women like this tell their own stories in film, literature, theater, what have you. So we primarily encounter them in entertainment as underdeveloped and or plot-servicing caricatures related to us by their husbands, children, friends, etc. But while A Christmas Story borrows the key visual conceit of shooting mainly at a child's eye level from E.T., it doesn't reduce the adult characters to simplified archetypes that Ralphie sees them as, instead allowing the audience to view them as the complete three-dimensional human beings young Ralphie can't fully comprehend, and whom adult narrator Ralphie can only view through the lens of his own memory. As such, even though Mrs. Parker doesn't get a proper name in the film, and of course she doesn't, her oldest kid is 9, her name is Mom, Dillon and the screenplay and the direction invest her with far more depth and nuance than this character usually receives, whereas typically movie stay-at-home moms come in two flavors, either saints on earth utterly fulfilled by their responsibilities, or tragically broken indentured slaves, representative of a regressive world free women must reject. Here we have a nuanced, well-rounded person with a full range of complex emotions, all of them visible in this scene and in this reaction.
Oh, can I please have some more?
My mother had not had a hot meal for herself in 15 years.
No, Mrs. Parker doesn't exactly seem to be in heaven, but she's not unhappy either. There's a contentment with the life that she's achieved, and even a distinct palpable pride in what she's able to provide, and specifically in being the only person who can get through to Randy. But yeah, she's also clearly exhausted by it, and who wouldn't be? It feels real, honest, and earned, and applying that same scrutiny to the rest of the characters yields similar rewards. Consider Darren McGavin as the old man. On the surface, he falls so easily into the sitcom archetype of the bumbling father who comes home from work to a family he only sort of knows and can't comprehend at all, retreating into his meager hobbies or distractions. But the elements that make him more than that are baked right into the narrative, and McGavin's winning performance brings it home.
I'll bet you never guess what I got you for Christmas.
A new furnace.
Yes, it's amusing that he takes so much pride in having mastered minor tasks like fixing the fuse box or changing a flat tire, or in the way that he's so proud of that terrible lamp.
I know just the place for it. Right in the middle of our front room window.
But consider what these things say about him in the context of the world the film builds around him. A Christmas Story deliberately does not offer a precise date for when its story takes place. There are clues, and we'll delve into them in detail in a little bit, but it's clearly sometime between the late 1930s and early 1940s, and while the movie doesn't address it outright, since what kind of understanding of it would a 9-year-old have, it's a huge component of the story. All of this is taking place in the gradual rebuilding from the Great Depression. Think about what context that places so much of the film in, how much it explains about the tremendous enthusiasm that this small Midwestern town musters for a big celebration of Christmas-time consumerism, how it informs the class malleability by which quote-unquote hillbillies, like the Bumpuses and their dogs, live next door to the seemingly financially sound middle-class Parkers, and how, assuming that like most families with children of that era, mom and dad had the now 9-year-old Ralphie at or near the beginning of their marriage, it tells us that the life they've built was built during a seriously difficult period for such undertakings. One of the most important intangible terrors of the Depression was that it shattered an entire generation's illusion that they, as opposed to huge labyrinthine financial systems, had control over their lives, and the lives that they built afterwards were often a direct refutation of the idea that they couldn't control things, that they were allowed to have privileges and pleasures.
Major Ward? Shucks, I wouldn't have known, Dad. It looks like a lamp.
Well, it is a lamp, you nincompoop, but it's a major award. I won it.
Damn hell, you say you want it?
Yeah.
With that fact hanging over things, and even though it doesn't come up, the period setting and the fact that these events are mostly based on an autobiographical anecdotes from author Gene Shepard's own life means that it is hanging over things, it's easy to see the quiet, though no less hilarious heroism and meaning behind the old man's actions. This is a man who is all too aware that he can't necessarily control everything in his family world, but he can keep the lights on, and the heat running, and the car mobile, and of course he's going to take pride in those things. And McGavin is as good as he's ever been as an actor at selling just how genuinely thrilled the old man is with every minor victory he manages to eke out of life.
It's a clinker!
I'll throw in some rope and tie it to your car for you.
You got a deal. 4 minutes. Time me. Hey, see, I told you it was green.
Oh, don't anybody move!
Even the subplot with the infamous leg lamp is illustrative of this. The payoff, of course, is to help us definitively establish just who is in charge of the Parker house, but it also begins a through line of establishing a generational connection between Ralphie and his father, i.e. men transfixed by consumer products of one kind or another. But whereas Ralphie seems to learn a lesson from the letdown of his Little Orphan Annie decoder ring,
A crummy commercial? Son of a bitch.
the old man, who again would have crystal clear memories of when essentials were scarce, is elated at the opportunity to display something that almost sort of constitutes a decorative indulgence. He's a goof, but he's a proud goof, unapologetic of himself, which is why it's such a satisfying beat when, in the finale, as the family suffers a mini tragedy so defeating that it even finally shatters Mom's iron resolve, the old man proves that he can step up, drop his tendency to overreact, and solve at least one more problem.
All right. Everybody upstairs. Get dressed. We are going out to eat.
And even though Randy doesn't get the precise same dimensionality as the rest of his family, consider what it says about their dynamic that his strange behaviors and tics aren't so much corrected as accepted and worked around.
Why don't you come on out of there? No? Would you like some milk? You would? Here you go. All right. I'll see you later. Okay. Bye-bye.
This even extends to minor characters. Teddy Moore as Miss Shields is allowed a measure of complexity, even as, being a schoolteacher, she's the most likely person to be exaggerated one way or another in memories of childhood.
C plus? C plus?
Just watch the range of reactions she goes through when Ralphie plops that fruit basket down onto her desk for brownie points, or the fact that the movie then cuts to her perspective so that we can get a sense of how ridiculous what our otherwise point-of-view character is being in this situation. Hell, even Scut Farkas and his lackey Grover Dill, the bullies, the characters Ralphie's memory would most be justified in turning into monsters, get a certain level of dimension. In most movies about childhood, defeating the bully is played for psychoanalysis and or humor. The hero kid gets off like one good hit, the bully breaks down in tears because he's never been stood up to before, the end. But in A Christmas Story, Ralphie, well, there's no other way to say it. Ralphie beats the shit out of Farkas.
Holy smokes!
I have since heard of people under extreme duress speaking in strange tongues.
And remember, we've never really seen this kid do much besides frighten them, growl, or put them in unconvincing arm locks. So to see this bad kid screaming in real legitimate pain with blood all over his face to the point that we almost feel bad for him is another unexpectedly human moment. Hell, just think about how unusual it is for a movie about childhood told from the perspective of a child about as child-focused a subject as treasured Christmas presents to devote so much time and sympathy to the feelings of its adult characters. I mean, speaking personally, as a perpetually nostalgic 34-year-old, I'm obviously given to identify more with Ralphie than with anyone. But you know which scene and which shot it is that ultimately makes me break down every single damn time? This one. Wow, yeah. And then there's our star, Peter Billingsley, as Ralphie. Let's talk about Ralphie. An unusual feature of the film is that while Ralphie is our main character and the central figure of almost every scene in the film, he's actually afforded a bit less in the way of on-screen humanization. In fact, a lot of instances it feels like A Christmas Story is content to treat his presence the same way movies do when the ostensible star is, say, a dog. He's there, he's acting, but we're largely watching the other characters' reactions, feeling the rhythm of the scene staging and listening to the score in order to know what he's supposed to be feeling or how we're supposed to feel about him. Now that's not a knock on Peter Billingsley. He's giving a fine, naturalistic performance as a shy, precocious, sort of dweeby little kid, and when he is called upon for more showy work in the fantasy sequences, he acquits himself very well, particularly in the cowboy fantasy where he hits dead center between authentic kid play acting and a humorous mimicry of action hero bravado.
Say this, Ralphie. I just know those bad guys would be coming for us in the end.
Go for it, Dad. As long as I got old blue.
Rather, it's an illustration of a deliberate choice on behalf of the filmmakers to divide their central character's viewpoint. While the visuals follow Ralphie from a third-person perspective, the omniscient narration spills out in first-person. Obviously, this is happening in order to highlight Gene Shepard's famous storytelling skills as the main reason for existing, but it does have the effect of making Ralphie immediately present in the story but also just outside of it, and the film is so admirably restrained about this conceit that it only allows Kid Ralphie to break the fourth wall in one perfect instance.
I had pulled it off.
Don't use voiceover narration as one of the big postmodern no-nos of screenwriting, and not without reason. It can, in fact, be an incredibly lazy shortcut, but A Christmas Story utilizes it to what is easily one of the best degrees in the history of the medium. Sure, without the omnipresent voice of his older self, or rather the voiceover trimmed back to only appearing as a bookend for key scenes, Ralphie would not be as powerful a character as he is.
God help you if you use voiceover in your work, my friends. God help you. It's flaccid, sloppy writing.
So then, it's a single role realized via two great performances working hand in hand, or at least edited in post-production sound design to work that way, and as such, Ralphie is an unexpectedly fascinating character, especially in the context of an audience surrogate in terms of what's left unsaid, or seems to be unsaid on the surface. You'll recall that our thesis at the start was that A Christmas Story makes it a point to not have an overarching point, but that doesn't mean it entirely lacks subtext, meaning, or consistent undercurrents to its story. Unless you think I'm about to start breaking our unofficial official rule of don't read into stuff that isn't actually there, don't worry.
Over the years, I got to be quite a connoisseur of soap. My personal preference is for Lux, but I found Palmolive had a nice, piquant after-dinner flavor, heady, but with just a touch of mellow smoothness.
Anyway, at the finale, adult Ralphie's narration informs us the Red Ryder Carbine-Action 200-shot range model air rifle BB gun with a compass in the stock and a thing which tells time is the greatest present he ever received or ever would receive. The phrasing there is interesting because it can be taken two ways. Either that's Ralphie speaking in remembered first person as a child, being adorably in the moment of not being able to imagine a better experience, Or this is adult narrator Ralphie speaking from experience seriously, i.e. that this really was his best Christmas.
Next to me in the blackness lay my oiled blue steel beauty. The greatest Christmas gift I had ever received or would ever receive.
What I'm asking you is this: A Christmas Story feels deliberately so, designed as though we're getting one portion somewhere in the middle of a bigger life story. But what if it isn't a middle? What if this story is sort of an ending? A consistent theme of nostalgia stories like this one is that we don't really understand how important certain moments of life are until we can look back on them. At first glance, A Christmas Story doesn't seem to have taken that same tack. There's not much talk about what's coming next from the narrator, no ending subtitles about the characters' fates like Animal House or Fast Times at Ridgemont High, no devastating revelations about where everyone wound up like the film's aforementioned Stepchild, The Wonder Years, or, some other 80s movie about childhood. Yeah, you guys want me to do that one? You'd better be buying the Xanax. Anyway, as far as A Christmas Story is concerned, the narration never really tells us anything about what the future holds other than that this was a particularly memorable series of events. And yet, if you track back through the movie, a picture begins to take shape of Ralphie being on the cusp of a fundamental change in the way he perceives and interacts with the world. It's never spelled out, it's never highlighted, but think about the important events of the story. The one moment of disillusionment that's allowed to hang without any balm is the bit involving the decoder ring. It's a small bit, but in a movie about small bits, this is kind of important. Over the course of the film, Ralphie doesn't necessarily outgrow his childhood attachment to branded toys and mass-marketed consumer knickknacks, since, he still is all about that BB gun. But in this moment, he does come to realize that a fictional character he's been absorbing and admiring as a benevolent entertainer and storyteller is actually just trying to sell him something. Today, that's a lesson some adults have a hard time grasping.
I went out to face the world again, wiser.
The big one, of course, is the way the fallout from the fight with Farkas plays out, i.e. the silent moment that passes between Ralphie and his mom as he realizes that she is not going to tell his father the whole story about the fight, and indeed immediately distracts him from the whole affair. The narrator even gets as close to future-telling as he gets in the entire film in order to highlight exactly how big a deal this is.
The Chicago Bears. Terror of the Midway.
From then on, things were different between me and my mother.
Well, more like Chicago chipmunks, maybe, but bears, never.
Alright then, turning point number 2. But what about his relationship with the old man? Stories about middle-class fathers and sons from this era are invariably colored by the fact that most fathers were expected to be largely outside the home and outside the day-to-day lives of their young children, with not really knowing or understanding one's father until much later in life, if ever, being a given. And for most of A Christmas Story, that's where we're situated. The one time Ralphie attempts to ingratiate himself to his dad man-to-man ends in disaster.
There we go.
Oh, for one brief moment, I saw all the bolts silhouetted against the lights of the traffic, and then they were gone.
Oh, fudge.
Only I didn't say fudge.
But the Christmas morning scene, the climax to the main central storyline of the film, turns out to be all about Ralphie and the old man. After all, it's the old man who releases him from the rabbit suit.
It looks like a pink nightmare. Are you happy wearing that? Do you want to take it off? Tell the kid to take it off.
All right, you'll only wear it when Aunt Clara visits. Go on and take it off.
Take it off!
But more importantly, it's the old man who ultimately provides Ralphie with the happy ending he wanted.
Hey, that's funny. What's that over there behind the desk?
Where?
Behind the desk, against the wall over there.
What did we put over there, honey?
Santa Claus probably brought it.
Okay, yes, there's a whole bunch of not all that happy stuff to be talked about here, but for now, focus on the text and what this moment means given the way these two characters have interacted throughout the rest of the film. Again, the old man isn't the parent who's mainly around for most of Ralphie's day. He acknowledges his father as a powerful being in his life, perhaps the most powerful, but his campaign to acquire the BB gun is mainly focused on what he considers to be the figures of immediate attentive authority: Mom, Miss Shields, Santa Claus. The old man, well, after all, it's not like Dad is going to be shopping, right? And yet here we are. And it's not just a random lucky thing either. The old man deliberately hid the present from everyone, including Mom, in order to make a big special surprise. Ralphie and the audience can be forgiven for assuming otherwise, but the real reveal of this moment isn't that the toy has been in the room all along, it's that the old man was in fact more observant, attentive, and present for his children than it seemed throughout the entire rest of the film. He was paying attention, he was listening. Plus, just look how thrilled he is to give the gift and to see Ralphie so excited to use it.
Do you know how to load it?
Yeah.
Yeah? That's right.
We don't see this side of the old man anywhere else in the film, and it's a real joy to behold, especially when you consider the implicit generational and era-specific undercurrents at play. Again, we'll talk about this in depth coming up, but whatever else you think about the presence of guns in American popular culture, it's a plain fact that, especially at this moment in time, it's a big deal that the Red Ryder Carbine-Action 200-shot range model air rifle BB gun with a compass in the stock and the thing which tells time finally arrives as a gift from a father to his son.
I had one when I was 8 years old.
Rifles, particularly the utilitarian sort being simulated by the Red Ryder models, hold an important place in American mythology, not only as tools of capital R revolution, but also of the frontier, and most importantly of all, as symbols of individual agency. Especially for the period where this takes place, this is not simply a toy, it's the training version of a tool, the readiness for which is an important sign of impending manhood. What I'm saying is, this whole sequence is signaling to us that after this, things were probably different between Ralphie and his father, too.
Careful. They run all over.
But there's one other aspect to this story and to the world it presents that could also be said to be at play here in terms of why this might have been such a momentous Christmas in Ralphie's hindsight, even if it's not explicitly acknowledged. The timing. As mentioned before, A Christmas Story doesn't give a specific time or place for when it actually happens on purpose, but it is deliberately grounded in visuals to suggest the late 30s or early 40s. There's not much in the film to give us any more specific grounding. The model of Red Ryder gun even is a fictional composite version that only exists in the world of the film, but there is one detail that has a real date. The decoder pin that Ralphie uses to get the Ovaltine message from Little Orphan Annie radio show is an authentic product, a 1940 Speed-O-Matic. So assuming for a moment that this new pin is indeed new when he receives it, that dates the events of A Christmas Story to December 1940, which would mean that the entirety of this film takes place just about exactly 1 year prior to this.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Ralphie's very next Christmas would be taking place in the immediate aftermath of his entire country being profoundly and irrevocably changed and shaken. You want to talk about something that would cast your world in a different light and whatever came immediately before into sharp relief? There it is. Now think back, there is no mention that World War II might be taking place anywhere in this movie. No one mentions it, it's not on the radio, it's not in the newspaper, we only ever see two people in what could be US military uniforms in one scene, and the army toys we see in the window of Higbee's are all World War I models. Even if A Christmas Story doesn't take place specifically 1 year before Pearl Harbor, it does all but definitively take place before World War II. We don't know what happened to this family as a result of that, but the fact that the war makes all stories in its immediate run-up implicitly about an innocent age that can only exist in memory, which of course was already Ralphie's story.
There it is. My house. At good old Cleveland Street. How could I ever forget it? And there I am.
So there we have it, the ultimate unspoken poignancy of A Christmas Story. It's the beginning of the end for Ralphie's childhood and the collective childhood of a moment in cultural history, even if he doesn't know it and the text only dimly acknowledges it. With everything we know about what is to come, how could this not be a season of turning points for him? How could this not be the best gift he'd ever receive?
Gradually, I drifted off to sleep, hanging ducks on the wing and getting off spectacular hip shots.
Okay, dry your eyes. Let's do the not fun part. This is always the hardest part of every Really That Good to write, not because it's hard to look at flaws, but because the nature of this project means that there's a built-in level of temptation to try and excuse flaws or issues rather than confront them. This is a show generally about affirming that beloved films are beloved for a reason, and that the reasons usually run deeper than mere itch-scratching nostalgia or personal attachment, but it's not a show about ignoring or glossing over problems just because you like the movie. I say this because in reevaluating A Christmas Story, the main two major we need to talk abouts that stand out are also aspects that require a discussion of that dreaded word context. And I want to be very, very explicitly clear that talking about issues in context does not, despite the internet's best efforts to prove otherwise, mean rendering said issues unimportant. Not actually problems or anything like that. To that end,
'tis the season to be jolly.
No. Not ra 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 la 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 la.
oh boy. Wow. I mean, look, the fact that despite the universalism of the overall themes, the story of a white middle-class family who can afford to give any present is by no means not everybody's story, and I imagine having to hear movies like this described as such is an understandable problem a lot of people have with A Christmas Story on multiple levels. If you want a clear and obvious yardstick of doing it wrong, how tone-deaf do you have to be about relative cultural sensitivity that Family Guy can call you out on it?
Oh my God, it's the carolers from A Christmas Story.
Deck their hearts with boughs of holly, fa ra 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 ra.
That's right, America. Don't forget, your beloved holiday movie is incredibly racist.
And from not that long ago.
What's especially sad is if you drop the jokey L for R's accent routine, which is weirdly the only bit of cartoonish caricaturing of anybody in the movie. I mean, there's no shuck and jive when we see the black carolers at the very beginning. This is such a cute scene otherwise. This is what I'm talking about where I mention context. The scene is supposed to feel odd and slightly uncomfortable. In 1940, the idea of Chinese immigrants running an ethnic restaurant was still a novelty, especially in American cities of this size and geographic location. The whole appeal was for middle-class families to feel as though they were eating something unusual and even exotic, right down to the fact that these places were often open during times when other traditional establishments were expected to be closed. And once the awful singing is over and the scene, which was apparently mostly improv, takes shape, it becomes adorable and fascinating as a moment. The Parkers are weirded out by stuff like the head still being on the duck, but they're also being grateful and nice about the fact that this place was there and open so they could have some semblance of a Christmas dinner. And likewise, the owners, and this is almost certainly a family business, are clearly all too happy to have customers that day. It's another small, well-observed, sweet moment in a movie made of them, as these two families awkwardly but affectionately reach out to one another across the gulf of culture and language. What a shame they had to ruin it with a tacky foreign accents joke.
All was right with the world.
But that's just a moment, and even then, what makes it a flaw isn't necessarily only the dated, problematic ethnic caricatures, though those are an issue, but how out of place they are in the rest of the film. If we're going to talk about stuff that gives a modern audience pause about A Christmas Story, we've got to talk about our central MacGuffin.
Oh, it was beautiful. I could hardly wait to try it out.
Yeah, a 9-year-old kid super psyched about his first gun, which is also a toy. Especially after this particular year in American history, yeah, this scene reads a little differently than it used to. I suspected it might, and rewatching it confirmed it. Sorry, but there you have it. Time marches on, your mileage may vary. Here's the thing, I'm not looking to get into a politics of gun culture thing here. Not the time, not the place, especially since I happen to hold a quintessentially coastal opinion on the subject. Namely that I believe in and cherish my Second Amendment right to bear arms, but the rest of y'all's Second Amendment right to bear arms scares the crap out of me.
Here's another one. Oh, he's a dead-eye 80.
In all seriousness, though, yes, from where I sit and where I imagine not a small amount of others do as well, in 2015, a moppet not even in his double digits rapturously celebrating his first toe dip into the gun culture just doesn't read as utterly innocent as it used to. Maybe for some audiences it's not an issue, maybe for some it always was, but there it is. For better or worse, American culture seems to be in the midst of an early-stage culture-wide shift, or at least discussion, in the way it thinks on the subject of kids and guns. And that shift makes the big central moment of A Christmas Story feel increasingly, well, yeah, different than it once did, and it's probably going to feel more different as more time passes. That happens sometimes. That having been said, once again, here comes Mr. Context, I don't ultimately think that this being a boy and his gun story changes or even undermines the rest of the narrative all that much because, like everything else in the film, you have to consider what all of this means at this moment in time. As I mentioned before, whatever I or anyone else thinks of guns in the 21st century, they have a key and unignorable place in the mythology of the United States. The US is, after all, a nation born out of armed revolution, expanded through frontier conflict, of, if we're being generous, severely dubious merit, don't get me wrong, and established as a world superpower entirely within the era of firearms being the predominant martial tool. As such, guns have an enormous important symbolic place in the American psyche, even among those who don't like guns or don't actively participate in the gun culture. Think about where the legends of Excalibur or the swords of Goro Masamune place in the collective psyche of their respective cultures, or what the symbolic tools of the working class have traditionally meant to socialist revolutionary thought, and you're close to understanding what the idea of the Red Ryder Carbine-Action 200-shot range model air rifle BB gun with a compass in the stock and a thing which tells time would have meant to a kid growing up in a culture like Ralphie's. The idea that this is an instrument of death or harm is secondary to it being an instrument of self-sufficiency and a symbol of, well, manhood. And I mean that in the sincere male adulthood sense, not some janky wannabe Freudian BS about phallic symbols. I'm talking about generational rite of passage stuff.
I had one when I was 8 years old.
And it's especially worth noting things like the fact that we don't see any actual guns as part of the film otherwise. The Parkers don't appear to own one. If they do, it isn't displayed anywhere. There isn't really any talk of them among the kids or in the ambient chatter of the grown-ups. Hell, in Ralphie's cowboy dream sequence, the only one with a gun, even the attacking robbers are only armed with knives, is him. And there was a second deleted dream sequence where Ralphie deploys Old Blue in the service of fighting alongside Flash Gordon. He doesn't even consider, in fantasy or otherwise, using it to solve his Scut Farkas problem. To me, stuff like that matters when contextualizing images and ideas from even the recent past. But hey, just one guy's opinion. The most common modern description of A Christmas Story's place in the pop canon is that it's become to Generation X and Millennials what It's a Wonderful Life became to their boomer parents, and that's more apt than the average think piece writer probably imagines it is. After all, despite the enduring images of life being the schmaltzy, feel-good, cathartic finale, people often forget that what makes that movie work is the rest of it being fairly clear-eyed, almost cynical look at the price George Bailey pays for being a decent man, that the plot turns on his suicide attempt, and that in order to learn the true meaning of the title, he and the audience have to run the emotional gauntlet of a horrifying alternate universe. In other words, it's a much better, deeper, richer, and intellectually and more satisfying movie than even the people who love it tend to give it credit for. And man oh man is A Christmas Story in that same boat, just for different reasons. Whereas the people forget about It's a Wonderful Life is that there actually is a sprawling, multi-dimensional, literally and figuratively, narrative behind it. The story of Ralphie and the Red Ryder Carbine-Action 200-shot range model air rifle BB gun with a compass in the stock and a thing which tells time really is a small, personal, constrained a thing as you remember it being. It's a movie where entire prominent, narratively vital moments revolve around things like getting a kid to finish his supper, receiving a middling grade on your homework, having a tongue stick to the pole in winter, visiting a mall, changing a flat tire, receiving a tacky prize, or taking one shot with a toy rifle. And it's easy to look at such a seemingly slight collection of vignettes without the presence of some big philosophical denouement explicitly tying them all together and think, I have to be wrong about this. I have to be overrating it. There's no way something so minor can be all that meaningful, profound, or even just good.
Oh, but no matter. Christmas was on its way. Lovely, glorious, beautiful Christmas around which the entire kid year revolved.
But it is that good, and it's also the main thing the film is getting across, that the little things do matter and don't require some kind of grand, bigger meaning imposed on high to do so. When it comes to A Christmas Story, as it is with life itself, sometimes some distance is required for us to understand, well, just how big the small things sometimes are. Will Ralphie, even say 6 months from Christmas, still consider unwrapping that BB gun to be the high point of his life? Who knows? Probably not, given how humans tend to work. But the adult Ralphie narrating his story from years in the future not only considers it, he knows it to be a fact. And if there's a question A Christmas Story does encourage the audience to ask, it might be this: is there anything happening in your life right now that might later turn out to be one of the most important things that will ever happen to you?
My house at good old Cleveland Street. How could I ever forget it?
A Christmas Story is a small, unassuming movie telling a slight story in low key, but then, on a long enough timeline, all stories are small and slight, except to the people who lived them. The family movie genre in particular is awash in films that try and fail to varying degrees at synthesizing the essence of being in the middle of those small moments, straining in vain to replicate the electric emotional charge triggered by seemingly tiny things like a single keepsake or a photograph or a smell or a song or a voice that sends us rocketing back somewhere we almost forgot. A Christmas Story is the rare movie that actually achieves this, and it does so with very little fanfare and very little in the way of self-congratulation. It does so without having to sugarcoat or soft focus the world it's revisiting, which is probably why it pulls it off in the first place.
Merry Christmas.
To borrow a seasonally appropriate turn of phrase, yes, Virginia, A Christmas Story is really that good.